Welcome to the Education Select Committee this afternoon for our oral evidence session with the Secretary of State, Bridget Phillipson, and the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Education, Susan Ackland-Hood. Can I first of all invite any members of the committee to make any relevant declarations of interest?
Yes, hello. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So I'm a new member, and I just want to declare that I am a serving Surrey County Councillor.
Thank you, and welcome Rebecca Ball as a new member of this committee as well to her first session. And can I invite our witnesses to introduce yourselves and to make any brief opening statements that you'd like to.
Thank you very much, Chair. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, and thank you for the opportunity to update members on the progress that the Department's made since we last met. It's been a busy year for education and for our mission to break the link between background and success. And I was just going to take a moment, not too long with the committee's time, just to set out some of the overarching strategic narrative, the ideas behind the changes this Labour government is bringing to education and how the work of the government speaks to that. Across education, especially in our schools, we're thinking in terms of three strategic shifts across the system. Changes that affect children and families that are delivered by teachers, leaders and staff. And the first of those is about ensuring that children move from forgotten to included. That applies to children currently left behind in the education system, especially white working class children and children with SEND. But that also means focusing on things that don't always grab the headlines, but where the country is crying out for better. And I want all children to grow up in loving homes, free from hunger and safe from harm. So it also means keeping children safe with better children's social care by delivering the biggest reforms to the system in a generation. And we'll bring families into the fold with early support to keep children safe, better recognition of their role through more kinship care and family decision making. I want all children I want better life chances for children where it comes to child poverty. You'll know as well as I do that the problems that hold back our children's education aren't simply inside the school gates or within classroom hours. And that's why we've expanded free school meals to 500,000 more children. Our first 750 free breakfast clubs will be joined by 2,000 more next year. And as the Chancellor announced last week, we're removing the two-child benefit cap, and our child poverty strategy will follow very soon. Altogether, we'll lift more than 500,000 children out of poverty, and I'm very proud to be part of a government driving the largest expected reduction in child poverty over a parliament since comparable records began. And we know that early education, early intervention is absolutely vital too. That's the approach that we set out in our Best Start in Life strategy in July, and we're raising its status by funding more early education and childcare, more children getting the start in life and parents getting back to work. And getting on with delivery, backed by £1.5 billion, rolling out our Best Start family hubs in every local authority, saving working families £7,500 a year. And to pick up this extra demand, we're funding 300 new and expanded school-based nurseries with more than 4,000 places already up and running. The second big shift, which is critical to enabling the first, is the shift from narrow to broad, and nowhere is that emphasis more apparent than in the publication of the Curriculum Assessment Review and the Government's response, giving children a broader curriculum alongside a strong academic core. And we're also broadening inclusion through investment to create 10,000 more places for children with SEND in mainstream and specialist settings. And when children reach school, I'm determined that they're met by the highest standards, and our new RISE teams are driving high standards for children in a system that has too long forgotten them and failed them. And the third shift, the shift that we want to see in the world as a result of our work, is the shift among our children and families from withdrawn to engaging. Children feeling that they really belong in school. They turn up every day, they know that school is for them. Sometimes school is joyful, sometimes it can be testing and stretching, but we know that school is always where children belong. And our breakfast clubs are a key part of that, as are the 2,000 more expert teachers we've hired since coming to power. The data shows we're making strong progress, and we'll build on that through the Schools White Paper next year. But our opportunity mission doesn't end with schools, and last month we published our Post-16 White Paper. We've already introduced Skills England, 10 new construction technical excellence colleges, more opportunities for young people and growth across our economy, alongside the steps we've taken to stabilise higher education and set an ambitious vision for our world-leading universities, putting them on a firmer financial footing into the future, taking the difficult decisions necessary to do that. And Chair, in the last year, We know that the hard work that we've delivered as a government is through the people that deliver education for our children and our learners. And it's through improving education together that we're working with employers and unions across education to ensure that our policies are designed with the staff that drive forward children's life chances as a part of that too. And I wanted to end by paying tribute to all of the wonderful workforces who do so much for our children and learners and go into work every day to make our country a better place. This year we've been collaborating with teachers, carers, parents, support staff, leaders, unions and employers. And in the spirit of partnership, I'm looking forward to discussing more of that with the committee this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Permanent Secretary, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. My name is Susan Ackland-Hood and I'm the Permanent Secretary in the Department for Education.
Thank you. So I'm going to start our questioning this afternoon. As you know, Secretary of State, our committee produced a significant report on SEND, solving the SEND crisis. And in that report, we agree with the government that focusing on driving inclusion in mainstream schools is the right place to start with SEND reform. But we are also clear that that is that the scale of change that is required is a very significant scale of change, and that delivering that scale of change will require resourcing. So I wanted to start off by asking what specific steps are being taken to assess how much additional funding will be needed to deliver SEND reform and to drive an inclusive mainstream system, and how are you seeking to make sure that that funding is available?
No, thank you very much, Chair. And we do welcome the committee's report and work in this area, and I want to thank you and committee members for the valuable recommendations that we're carefully considering as part of the wider reform that we intend to set out. We're working very closely with parents, carers and others, and just today we launched our national conversation on SEND, the biggest in a generation. The School Standards Minister is launching the first of those regional events, so lots of regional events, online opportunities for parents to contribute alongside the SEND development group that we've established with many kind of key campaigners, charities and others to help us design a better system of support for children with SEND. You'll appreciate this is a huge area, so I'll respond to what you've asked, but please, I'm sure you might want to interrupt if you want to focus on particular areas. I think the starting point for me and for the government is that the system we have at the moment for children with SEND just isn't working in terms of their outcomes and life chances. That has to be the starting point. That is the guiding principle behind everything that we're doing around this. There are clearly pressures where it comes to funding, and I'll speak to what we secured at the spending review and what we're doing at the moment. But even if money were no object, even if those pressures didn't exist, I don't think anyone would look at the system right now and conclude that it's working well for children, for staff in education, or overall in terms of life chances. And where it comes to investment, as you'll know, we're investing £1 billion into the high needs block alongside £740 million of capital spending to create additional provision for children. And that goes hand in hand with some of the cross-departmental work that's already underway. For example, work with the Department for Health and Social Care around the PINS programme, which is around neurodiversity and making improvements together with parents in our schools. And whilst it's right that we obviously focus on the changes that we want to bring to the system, I think it is important to recognise that there is much fantastic and brilliant practice that's out there, as you identified through the committee's report. But that's too variable, it's too patchy, and we as a government intend to use the settlement from the spending review to drive more of that across the country. I'll pause there, Chair. I know this is a huge area. I could keep talking, but there may be areas you wish to focus on more.
Yeah, I think just to push you a little bit on the resourcing. So we would agree that absolutely that the financial crisis in the system is not the only problem that there is, but we're also clear that change doesn't come for free. Yeah. So it's that, I suppose it's that specific question around what is the process for identifying the scale of resourcing that's needed in order to deliver a change so that we get to the other side and we have a system that is delivering much better for children and is also much more financially sustainable as a result.
Yes, and financial sustainability is important, but I do just want to emphasise that even if that that wasn't a challenge, we would need to make the system better, because if you look at outcomes for children with SEND, I think we can all recognise that they're far, far away from where they want to be, and the difficult nature of how hard parents have to fight for support is something that needs to change. I mean, there is obviously the investment into the school system that I've already outlined, but we all know that early support for families is also critical. So the extra £1.5 billion over the next 3 years around early years support around the Best Start in Life strategy is critical. The wider reforms to children's social care are important as well, but also the Families First funding that we're delivering through with MHCLG is also about better identifying children's needs at a much earlier point, and the work with DHSC as well about early access to speech and language support in particular. And I suppose I would just add that part of this is about how we build up and improve the system ahead of wider reform, because I recognise that parents' confidence is low given what they've experienced over many years, and the need to invest up front in order to deliver change. And that's why through the spending review we secured significant investment in order to drive that change alongside the investment I've set out around high needs and capital spending.
Thank you. You've described the process that you're currently embarking on with stakeholders as co-creation. Can you explain how that is different from engagement? What do you mean specifically about co-creation that gives participants in that process a kind of equal, puts them on an equal footing, means that they're properly resourced to be a part of the process, and what role will they have in decision making as the government reaches its conclusions about reform?
Yeah, so as I said, today we've launched that national conversation on SEND, and over the last year I spent a lot of time speaking with parents, carers, teachers and disability rights groups and others. And we've also had our advisory group working with us, our experts working with us to support that. But what we've also established is our SEND development group that the Minister for School Standards is going to lead on a weekly basis with all of those key voices within the sector. I attended the first one last week. They're meeting on a weekly basis, and that runs alongside the 9 regional events that we're delivering in partnership with the Council for Disabled Children. We recognise that not everybody can get along to face-to-face events, although they are critical, and that's why there will also be online events. There will also be the opportunity through the website that we've launched for parents, for others to submit their views through that. We want as many opportunities as possible for people to share their views, to share their experiences about what change is required. We'll then set out our plans in the school's white paper next year, but running alongside that we'll further consult. There'll be a formal consultation process running alongside the co-creation work that we have underway at the moment.
Thank you. The announcement in the budget that local authorities' SEND deficits are going to be brought onto the central government balance sheet from 2028-29 has caused a lot of anxiety, and you know that from all of the coverage that there has been since the budget. Can you outline what the process is going to be for that, and when you expect to be in a position to set out how those deficits will be distributed across government departments, and how the government will effectively deal with taking on a deficit that it doesn't currently have onto its own balance sheet?
Yes, and if you'll allow me, Chair, I'll just explain briefly the process here, because I think there has been some misunderstanding as to some of the discussion around the budget and the OBR's figures. So the OBR set out the position connected to council deficits being accounted for within the government balance sheet. And alongside that, we published the Treasury's position that that deficit is to be dealt with through overall government spending. The OBR published in their report illustrations of what that might mean, entirely hypothetical scenarios as to what that might mean for the core schools budget, were it to be taken from there. I can be absolutely clear that is not the case. You'll note that the words in the Treasury document were agreed with care between the Department for Education and the Treasury, and it's not by chance that they focus on overall government DEL envelope, not the DFE's DEL envelope. But of course, the OBR can't account for any future changes to the system because we've yet to publish them, because we're still developing those through the process that we've just been talking about. And of course, this takes us into the next spending review period, alongside that, the 28-29 period. I do recognise the importance of talking about this. I recognise the challenges that local authorities are experiencing at the moment, and that's why we're working with them to make improvements happen in the here and now. But all that said, I can't emphasise enough that this has to be about better outcomes for children with SEND. That is our starting point, would always be our starting point, even if we weren't having a conversation about the numbers.
Thank you. And we'll go to Caroline Bowden now.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on that. I think you, hello Secretary of State, we did talk about this at yesterday's oral questions, and I think you might have just partly answered what I was going to ask you, but I'll just go through it again. So you said yesterday that the cost wouldn't be coming from the school's budget, which you've just repeated here. And you said that the cost would vaguely be covered across all budgets, but the spending review has been allocated for this Parliament. So can you give us any idea where this money is going to come from?
We agreed the wording with Treasury that's in their document about it being across government, but of course the next spending review will commence in 2027, so that will take place and follow into that. And it might be helpful if you could set out just how we got here.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So the start of this was that following on from 2014 SEND reforms, we started to see local authorities reporting deficits in the mid-2010s, and by the end of 2018-19, about half of local authorities had an overspend on their DSG. At that stage, that was about £250 million in total. Because the 2014 SEND reforms were still bedding in, we were still going through a process of change, at the time, I think it was felt that this might be a short-term change hump, essentially. And so there was work done between the Department for Education, MHCLG and the Treasury to introduce the statutory override, which came in from 2020-21. And that essentially put a temporary block on the need for local authorities to account for their DSG deficits. And that was initially in place for a short period. We also put in place at that time some mechanisms to work with the local authorities with the most significant deficits to try and bring them down. The short version of what happened is that although we are really confident that without those programmes the deficits would have been even worse, they weren't sufficient to stop the deficits growing. And I think it doesn't look like it was a short-term change hump. It looks like it was a more sustained challenge. And I mean, for what it's worth, I think it's helpful actually that the OBR have kind of recognised this and put it in the conversation, because essentially there was a piece of the pressure that wasn't clear and visible, and there was a risk that people were therefore trying to design solutions that didn't properly account for it. And I think that although it feels challenging to say it'll go on the balance sheet, what that does is it recognises that it's a problem that we need to solve together between central and local government, that we can't just keep expecting local government to do this all on their own. So it feels like a big shift, but actually what it's doing is recognising the reality of that situation that we've seen. I think that the things the Secretary of State has said that I just would emphasise are the precise figure is a projection. So other things we might do in the meantime have the capability to shift the level of pressure, and we have to think about that really hard. We wouldn't do it just to move them money. We want to do it to improve the system. But also, we've got some time to work this through together across government and between central and local government and through the reform programme. And how this falls and where it lands will depend a bit on the content of the reform work as well. And then that'll feed into the spending review that starts from 27-28. But essentially, this is government saying we recognise this is a challenge we have to meet collectively. And as the Secretary of State says, it was careful and deliberate that what the Treasury said in their document was that it was coming out of whole government DEL, not out of school budgets. And that is because it is recognised as a whole of government challenge that we have to address.
Thank you. We'll go to Peter.
Very quickly on that, can I just ask about the existing debt that local authorities are holding?
Yes. So we've further extended the statutory override in July this year, and that goes to the end of 27-28, so it lasts until this moment comes in. And we have said that we will work with local government on the transition out of that and into the management of it, and we'll be able to say more about that as we put out the local government settlement later in the year.
Thank you. Can I ask about, so fantastic to see the consultation out today around those 5 areas of reform, and in particular I wanted to focus on the 5th area, shared. As you know, the Education Select Committee's report into solving the SEND crisis identified an inadequate relationship at the moment between departments and between stakeholders, including DHSC and MHCLG, and with local authorities. And this is particularly on the ground felt in not enough of a role for health in delivering SEND. So I just wanted to ask you, from your perspective, how you see a more integrated approach developing and clear accountability in delivering SEND reforms, where it's not just one stakeholder at the table, but actually it's across stakeholders.
Yes, I mean, I agree, and it is absolutely critical, given that many of the challenges parents report are not simply what happens in school, but what happens, for example, with access to OT support, to speech and language. All of that is a critical part of what we need to do. It also connects very much to our Best Start family hubs and the need to ensure that we've got a trained SEND practitioner in every hub to work with families to identify those needs. But just to give one example of some of the work that we have underway with health it is making a difference, it is around the PINS programme that I referred to, Partnership for Inclusion of Neurodiversity in Schools. This is cross-government between us, DHSC, NHS England, but also working with the National Network of Parent Carer Forums. And one central part of the work that we're delivering at the moment is the engagement with parents in particular, because we know that parents' experiences for their children are not where they need to be. But also we know from PINS and from some of the visits that I've done in, there was one visit to Allerton Primary I did in Derby, where I met with parents afterwards. They'd been part of the programme. And All Saints in Wigan quite recently. When I met with parents at the end of the visit, often quite small practical changes that need to be made within the classroom setting that made the world of difference to their children's experience in school. And to hear from parents whose children had not been attending school very regularly, or where there'd been real challenges, to see that engagement, you know, through working together with the school leadership, with the staff, through the additional training that the staff there had received, including connected to the NHS, that had made a really big difference. So partnership means what we do across government between departments, and we're doing a lot together with DHSC and MHCLG in particular. But it also matters on the ground, as you say, the links between services locally, but also the engagement between parents and schools, where, as I say, it's sometimes what might seem like relatively small and modest changes can transform a child's experience in the classroom and can improve standards.
And that brings us back to the co-creation point, which I was going to go on to ask you about, but I think we've covered, so I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Peter. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary of State and Permanent Secretary. I just want actually to touch on Peter's question, and I'd be really grateful to hear from the Secretary of State on this point, and I'm just going to go into a bit more detail about it. So you've obviously talked already about future SEND spend from 2028 to 29, which is the 6 billion number. I'm very, very interested in the 14 billion of historic DSG deficits held off balance sheet under the statutory override mechanism. As you've already said, that statutory override mechanism will end in 2028, and if that's not dealt with, many local authorities will go bust at that point, being frank. So could I push you to give us a bit more detail about the type of solutions you're looking at, because this is catastrophic stuff if we don't get this right in 2028 when the statutory override ends with the 14 billion.
I agree that this is extremely serious, has obviously built up over many, many years. We're obviously working with local authorities at the moment to manage their send pressures, and I will address the question directly about next steps. But I think there are some really good examples of where councils, together with DFE or sometimes separately, can create more provision that seeks to reduce some of those pressures. So we know, for example, that if we can create more specialist provision in mainstream settings closer to home, that is better for children. It's what parents want because they want their child to be able to go to a local school, but it can also have the impact of reducing transport costs alongside that. And some local authorities who are in a stronger position where it comes to managing this have often over a period of a decade or so made some of these changes that have sought to bear down on the costs, but crucially delivering what parents want, which is, you know, great local schools that provide for their children. Where it comes to the statutory override, we'll set out further details around all of this in terms of supporting local authorities with historic and accruing deficits through the upcoming local government finance settlement. So I'm a bit limited in what I can say at the moment. But the message I would want local authorities to hear is that both through the investment that we will be delivering with that £740 million and the investment that many local authorities are themselves delivering, investing in provision through capital resource, that will be critical to, over the long term, bringing down cost, but also delivering better outcomes for children. And I wouldn't want councils to wait around pending any outcome. We need to be getting on and doing this now. It's the right thing to do, and we will put the resourcing that we can into making that a reality. But that is the long-term path to sustainability. There is variability between local authorities on this point. That also includes lack of specialist provision in some places running alongside that.
Thank you. I mean, grasping the nettle is obviously really important in this case. Are you I assume you're working closely with MHCLG on this big issue?
Yeah, both on this and on children's social care, amongst other issues, but those are two of the biggest challenges that we're facing, but also I think where there is a real opportunity to transform services and systems that will lead to better outcomes for children, including some of the most vulnerable children in our country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go to Chris.
Thank you, Chair. The Department has described meeting its pledge to recruit 6,500 new teachers during this Parliament as a significant challenge due to fiscal constraints. Do you, Secretary of State, feel that this is an achievable target? And what specific actions are you taking to achieve it? And I think often we talk about teachers' pay, but I would suggest some experience on this, that there's other aspects taken into account, for example, teacher welfare, and obviously equally their workload. I wonder how you're taking this into account and how you think you're able to achieve that target.
Yes, recruiting and retaining more teachers is critical to this government and our plan for change. Everything that we've spoken about around outcomes for children and delivering a brilliant education we can't do without high quality teaching. And we know the evidence is clear that has the biggest impact on children's outcomes. We're making good progress and we're seeing positive signs, and there'll be more data following on later this week as well around the latest ITT census. But over the last year, the workforce has grown in secondary and special schools where we need them most. That isn't the case in primary, given the falling rules and the demographic change that we're seeing. We're also seeing more acceptances in subject shortages at secondary, particularly in STEM subjects, which is really welcome, and seeing positive signs where it comes to retention alongside that too. There's more to do. There's absolutely more to do, but we're moving in the right direction. You're right to say that pay isn't the only factor. Pay is an important factor where we have sought to take action. The most recent pay award, a 4% combined with the previous award, means that over 2 years, teachers and leaders' pay will increase by almost 10%. And we're offering trainee school teacher incentives this year in targeted areas as well. But you're right that alongside pay, there are wider questions of workload and well-being. We're addressing much of that through improving education together, the means by which we work with employers and trade unions on identifying key areas of concern. One of the biggest areas that has been raised time and time again with me is child poverty and the wider impact of failure across society. It's why I believe the investment that we're making as a government in lifting the 2-child cap is not just an investment in children and their futures, it is an investment in education and our schools, because I've heard from too many teachers and staff that they're having to support children who are coming to school hungry, where their parents are struggling, where they're washing clothes, and the big challenge around too many children in temporary accommodation. Taking action in those key areas will also be a critical part of how we address some of the wider pressures that exist for our teachers and staff. And, you know, does align with many of the calls that were made of us as a new government from many campaigners, from trade unions and others. And I do think this is both the right thing to do from a moral point of view, but will lead to significant improvements for our teachers and staff. There's a wider, longer-term challenge as well running alongside that about investment in family support services. So when children arrive at school, they're able to learn and their parents are getting the support that they need.
I'm going to follow up on that. She spoke about obviously particularly low recruitment in particular subjects, and then, well, no, she didn't, but you talk about the importance of STEM and those subjects. And the department recently reduced or removed teacher training bursaries for subjects with historical low recruitment. I just get an idea of why that decision was taken, and do you think that will adversely affect your aim to increase teacher recruitment? Sorry.
I mean, we have finite resources and have to target our resources in the areas where we face the greatest shortages or where we can make the greatest impact. You'll be pleased to hear that the numbers are moving in the right direction around maths teachers in particular.
Can't think why.
But there's still, even though we had one down, we've recruited a few more. But there is more to do, and you know, that does speak to some of the other challenges I know that teachers and staff are facing. Behaviour is an area that often is raised. It is a big challenge, and where our new attendance and behaviour hubs, we're working with schools facing some of the greatest challenges to make improvements in those areas, and this will also be an area of focus in the school's white paper as well.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon, Secretary of State. Secretary of State, in your manifesto you promised 6,500 teachers in key subjects. Yeah. I noticed just now you said the workforce had grown, but you didn't specifically use the word teachers, so just wanted to check with you that what you mean by that is that the number of teachers had grown, because it had fallen in the census in the summer. And when you talk about key subjects, can you specify what those key subjects are, please?
Yeah, the number of teachers has grown in secondary and special schools. They're the areas where they're needed the most. We sadly don't need as many teachers in primary school given the demographic changes that we're seeing. But yes, that number has increased by more than 2,000.
And the key subjects?
It's not subject specific, it relates to secondary and special schools.
When you said key subjects in the manifesto, you meant secondary schools and special schools?
Sorry, go ahead.
So we look quite carefully at how and advise ministers on how to define the target, and the definition we landed on was secondary and special school, partly because we're seeing demographic growth, so we do need more teachers even in non-shortage subjects, but within that we're also tracking very carefully to make sure we aren't recruiting them all in areas where we've got kind of less need. So the overall 6,500 number looks at secondary special and actually FE as well, because we're seeing quite big demographic growth in 16 to 19-year-olds in FE. So that's the definition. But within that, we do look at the subject specialism. So the growth of, it's a bit more than 2,300 that the workforce has grown by in that single year, 23, 24 to 24, 25, which really is encouraging. And back to your question about, is this doable? It's one of my jobs as accounting officer to try and work out if the things we promised to do are deliverable. I think it is deliverable. I think it's quite exciting, actually. But we really want to make sure that we don't hit the target and miss the point. So underneath that headline, we keep looking at the individual subjects as well. Then again, you'll be able to see some of that in the successive figures that we produce.
So on that, I mean, in terms of the key subjects, that kind of is going to change depending on where the shortage is almost and where you think you need to look at it. Yeah.
Caroline, did you?
Thank you. Following on from that, in December 24 and before the election, Labour said that the VAT rise in private schools would pay for more teachers. The Chancellor in December 24 said every single penny of that money will go into our state schools. More recently, the Prime Minister has said, my government made the tough but fair decision to apply VAT to private schools, and because of that choice we have announced the largest investment in affordable housing in a generation. As the Education Secretary, who is telling the truth? Has the money been given to you to buy teachers, or has it gone to MHCLG to buy houses? Because you can't spend it twice.
No, luckily we've raised, we're investing way more in schools than the VAT raises, although I was delighted to see at the budget that the changes around VAT are raising even more than had been anticipated. And that means we're able to invest in schools where there's a big increase this year in terms of school funding. And that goes way beyond what was promised in the manifesto around investment in schools and teachers.
Thank you. And final question about, if I might, do you want more or less people to go to university? And the reason, one of the reasons I asked that is that in your website, still available last night, it says, promises, graduates you'll pay less under Labour. But quite apart from the general increases in taxation that this government has heaped on people in last year's budget and again in this year's budget, there are specific changes, both the rise in tuition fees and the lowering of the threshold for paying back student loans, mean that graduates specifically will be paying more under this government. What effect do you think that will have on university numbers?
In terms of the
regret making that promise?
In terms of the first question, I want young people to make the choices that are right for them. The Prime Minister announced his target that 2/3 of young people should be in higher level training or in a university place. I think it's right that we also focus in on the gap that we've seen in recent years around higher level technical skills running alongside university being a great option for young people. But I want young people to have genuine choices about what's right for them, making decisions that are right. But I would want any young person who's got what it takes to be able to go to university if that's what they choose. It's why we have taken the necessary decisions to increase tuition fees, the top level of the cap. And you know, I appreciate the committee has looked closely at issues around financial sustainability in the university sector. It's right, therefore, that after years of fees not increasing, we've taken that decision to make sure that fees have gone up and will continue to increase in order to secure the long-term future of our world-leading universities. But I do recognise the cost of living pressures that students are facing. It's why maintenance loans are also going up in line with inflation, and that will continue. And alongside that, why I'm delighted that we're bringing back new targeted maintenance grants for college and university students in areas aligned with government missions and industrial strategy priority areas, making sure that young people who want the chance to continue at college or at university have got the ability to do so.
Okay, but do you think you broke your promise when you said graduates will pay less under Labour, given the fact that you have increased specifically, not just general taxation with other people, but you've actually specifically increased the fees they paid to go to university and lowered the threshold at which they've got to pay back, that actually you've broken your promise there?
Well, the threshold, of course, applies to a different cohort, but I'm pleased that we have been able to reintroduce new targeted maintenance grants. That wasn't something that we committed to in the manifesto, so we've gone beyond our manifesto in delivering that, alongside investment in skills that will be a part of that too. Through the budget, we have, as a government, faced some tough choices given the state of the public finances. I do believe it was the right decision to increase tuition fees. Of course, students shouldn't be deterred from going to university on that basis because you only pay it back post-graduation, subject to thresholds, as you've said. And university is still a great option for many, many young people. But as I say, maintenance loans are also increasing too. We went through a period of more than 7 years where tuition fees didn't increase. We've seen the impact that that's had on the university sector. That's why I know the committee has taken a keen interest in the financial sustainability of the sector, and by giving that stability to the sector, we'll allow them to plan for the future alongside asking students through their fee to make a contribution towards that.
Go to Serena.
Thank you, Secretary of State. We'll now consider children's social care. In the committee's inquiry, we heard strong support for introducing a national offer for care leavers to harmonise entitlements across the country and end the postcode lottery that too many experience. Will you commit to introducing a national care offer?
We are addressing the cliff edges that young people experience as they leave care. We're going to provide a national staying close support package as we set out in the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill. That will mean that care leavers can find and keep suitable accommodation alongside an offer of practical and emotional support to help them live independently. I co-chair the Care Leavers Ministerial Board that works across government on many of these key areas. What we do within the Department for Education is critical, but we all know that there are many long-standing challenges that care leavers experience, whether that's through being disproportionately represented in the prison population, the challenges around access to mental health support if that's needed. And it's why the fundamental reform that we're seeking to bring through the bill is a shift away from the increasing crisis end intervention, given the escalation we've seen in the system, to much more timely and early support for young people, particularly around fostering and kinship care. We'll be setting out more around changes in fostering soon, because we know that there is a big gap around recruiting and retaining foster carers, and if we can support children to remain in a family environment, either through foster carers or work through kinship care where that's safe and appropriate to do so, that will make a big difference to the lives of many children in our country, and that runs alongside the wider reforms to the broken market that we see around children's social care and the action that we're taking around excess profiteering.
Yes, there are some local authorities that have put good practice out there and have designated care experience as a protected characteristic. Is this something that the department would support?
That's not something that we're actively considering at the moment. Our focus has been on both the measures in the bill to make improvements happen, but also the changes that we're driving across that Care Leavers Ministerial Board, especially with colleagues in MHCLG around staying close. For far too long, children who've been through the care system have not had the support or protection that they deserve. We're determined to change that. We need to provide better support for children as they emerge from children's social care, but we need to prevent fewer children ending up in the care system to begin with, and that's the critical element of the reforms. We have seen a big increase in children who require support through the care system. If we can do more to support families at an earlier point, and that's the intention behind the Families First programme, is to provide early support, early help, alongside the other reforms in the bill around families being involved in some of that decision making, where if it's possible to keep children within a family environment with those who know and love them best, that will lead to better outcomes in the long run, of course, only where that is safe to do so.
You've talked about some of the steps that the government is taking to improve support for care leavers and to sort of harmonise support across the country. Why not commit to a national offer, which we know from the evidence that we've taken would give significant security and peace of mind to care experienced young people, not least when they are thinking about whether they want to apply to university and perhaps move to a different part of the country, to know that support will be the same wherever in the country they choose to live.
So as I say, we do have the National Staying Close support package offer. We'll obviously continue to keep under review what further is needed, but we do have a very big and ambitious package of wider reforms to the children's social care system, and that runs alongside further comprehensive measures we also want to bring forward around the fostering system to increase the number of foster carers in particular, because we see a big challenge in terms of the number of people that come forward to become foster carers, but that doesn't translate into people becoming foster carers. So, every time we meet as a cross-ministerial board, we hear at the start of that session from a young person who has been through the system and what matters most to them. So we continue to make sure that the voices of young people are heard right throughout that process.
Thank you. We will continue to keep a really close interest in this area, and you will know, Secretary of State, that staying close is a very helpful and important initiative, but specifically with the question of whether a young person might choose to move to a different town to attend university, it's one of the areas that isn't a relevant it's not a relevant consideration for that. That those young people want to know that when they move to a different place, the support that might be available to them will be the same, and they can rely on that, and it doesn't need to be a worry in thinking about their ability to fulfil their potential and take up opportunities that are on offer to them. So we will keep a very close watching brief on this, and we will continue to push for a more consistent national approach to support for care leavers.
Yes, absolutely. And we're also working very closely with universities in particular on many of these challenges. For example, the need for year-round accommodation for young people that might not have a family home to return to. It's also why through the higher education reforms that we've set out, for the first time we're guaranteeing that care experienced young people will be automatically eligible for the full maintenance loan.
Yeah, thank you. Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. Turning now to child poverty, breakfast clubs, free school meals. I'm going to start with breakfast clubs. I'm someone that acknowledges how amazing they are. They're absolutely the right thing to do. They make sure that children don't have to start the school day hungry. They provide wraparound care, amazing benefits for parents and work too. However, we know that the DfE did a survey of school leaders about 3 months ago. The results were published 3 months ago. And 75% said that they were going to struggle to make them financially viable. And 71% of school leaders in primary schools also said that they didn't have the staff to make breakfast clubs viable. What's your response to this and how can you help them?
Yes, and this is something that we are addressing through the early adopter programme. I should just stress that that survey was a survey that was carried out across education. It wasn't specifically from the early adopters, and we're seeing kind of different evidence coming back from the early adopters about how they're managing to make the numbers add up and also make sure they've got the staffing in place. And one area that's been fed back to me time and again visiting breakfast clubs is that they've really valued the peer network that's been established, so to work with other schools perhaps in a similar context with a similar community in order to look at how the staffing model that they've operated and how they're running. But you know, we do want to make sure that ahead of full national rollout this is working well for schools. It's why in the next phase of breakfast clubs that will commence from next April, as the part of the start of the national rollout, we are changing the funding model compared to the early adopter programme. So from April 26, schools on the free breakfast club programme will receive £1 per pupil per day alongside a standing payment of £25 per day. That's a change to what we'd trialled through the early adopter model. It's in response to what's been feedback that we've received from schools about how best to make that work. We'll obviously continue to keep that under review to make sure that the model is the right one for schools. But you know, I am delighted that we've, as well as having the 750 already, that from next year as we move towards national rollout, we'll invest another 80 million into the programme and fund an additional 2,000 schools between April 26 and March 27. That will benefit around 500,000 more children and makes a huge difference to children's ability to learn, because it's about the club and not just the breakfast. And I've visited many breakfast clubs over the last in recent months in particular, and what I've heard from staff is that it makes an enormous difference as children arrive in the classroom calmer, having had time with their friends, really settling in. And also for children with SEND, whilst I appreciate there can sometimes be barriers to children with SEND accessing breakfast clubs, and we're working with schools to address that, I've also heard a lot from teachers and leaders that for children with SEND, that softer start to the day can make a big difference when they arrive in the classroom to learn.
Brilliant. No, I'm pleased to hear that you're taking account of the feedback, looking at those pilot breakfast clubs, and then making adjustments to the financial arrangements going forward so that they are viable, because it is so important that they succeed in every school. Turning to free school meals then, again, extremely pleased to hear the announcement that free school meals were to be extended. Incredibly welcome that that's happened. No child should go hungry at school. This committee recognises that something like 11%, according to the LGA, of those eligible don't take them up, and it equates to more than 200,000 children who aren't taking the free school meal that they are eligible for. So we have called on the government to adopt auto-enrolment. Is this something you'll adopt?
So we do want to make sure that all families who are eligible get the support that they're entitled to, and from September 26, all children in households in receipt of universal credit will be eligible for a free school meal. That will lift 100,000 children out of poverty by the end of the Parliament, in addition to the 450,000 children who will be lifted out of poverty due to changes to the two-child limit. That's why it does represent the biggest ever change in a Parliament that's been projected. We do believe it will be simpler and more straightforward if parents know that it just relates to universal credit, given the complications of the threshold previously. People will know if they're receiving universal credit or not, and that will make the process more straightforward. But we're also working with families and local authorities to deliver improvements to the eligibility checking system, so to make sure that families are accessing the support that they need. And we're continuing to work with the Department for Work and Pensions around what more we might be able to do in this area.
Yeah, we've got a number of councils that have adopted auto-enrolment policies. I think Lambeth, just over the river, have done the same. But of course, councils have to expend a greater amount of their resources to do so. If there was a national scheme of auto-enrolment, that would simplify the process and essentially save councils money, as well as feeding more than 200,000 children the free school meals they deserve. Is it not something the government will consider?
We'll continue to keep it under review as we expand next year. We do believe it will be simpler for parents to know whether or not they're eligible. Part of the problem that we have at the moment around the existing threshold is parents won't often know if they're eligible. I think there are further improvements we can make through the eligibility checking system. You rightly identify that some local authorities already have processes in place to increase take-up. But I should also just add, alongside this, this is extra money that is being invested as a part of this, so it's an extra £1 billion, and it will make an enormous difference to children and families.
Absolutely. And just on that difference, my final question is about how you'll assess the impact. What plans do the department have to assess the impact of breakfast clubs and the extension of free school meals on things like attainment and attendance?
Yes. So I suppose in there's probably just an extra point to raise on free school meals before I answer that, which is we also have a review of school food standards underway at the moment as well, connected to this, and I think that is relevant in terms of understanding the impact. We will continue to review the impact both of free school meals and of breakfast clubs. We have work underway in understanding the impact through the early adopter scheme. We'll continue to track that as we move to national rollout, and I think there is already some evidence available around free school meals, but more limited. I mean, in terms of breakfast clubs, part of the reason that we took the decision to focus our efforts in that area was because of the pre-existing evidence around the impact on children's learning through the EEF and others, and we continue to work with organisations like the EEF to shape and inform our policy to make sure that we're guided by the best evidence and the best outcomes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Darren.
Afternoon, Secretary of State. You've reported to this committee and to the House about the progress of the government's child poverty strategy. We don't yet have it though, so can you say what are the delays and when can we expect to see this, please?
Very, very soon. I don't know if I'm allowed to say when exactly. Is that in the public domain? I can't recall.
I don't think we
soon. Very soon. Very soon.
It's going to be very soon.
Hours, days, weeks?
You won't have long to wait, but I think...
Sooner than shortly, or in the near future?
I think it is sooner than shortly.
Imminently.
But I hope it will see the light of day very, very soon. But I mean, I think it's fair to say that what lots of people were waiting for was to understand the changes that we intended to make around social security. There is more beyond that, but clearly lifting the 2-child limit was central to any effective child poverty strategy, given we know it is the single most effective way of lifting the largest number of children out of poverty. But the child poverty strategy will also consider how right across government, whether that's in MHCLG, Department for Transport, DEFRA, all of the departments that have been around the table in developing that strategy, what each of us can do to lift more children out of poverty, going beyond social security measures.
And precisely on lifting the 2-child cap, many of us who have worked in preventative versus reactive services know that precisely the point is that later on we don't have to pay that money on worse outcomes for children. So this is an investment in tackling child poverty. However, of course, it does come with an upfront cost estimated to be around 2.4 billion. So have there been any trade-offs? Are there other measures that you were expecting to be able to spend money on and invest in other child poverty measures that now won't happen because of lifting the 2-child cap?
You're right that this comes at a financial cost in terms of making this change. But we know that child poverty comes at an enormous cost, not just in terms of the deep moral injustice experienced by children, but also the wider societal failures and the costs that we pick up for children's social care, children's outcomes at school. Children who grow up in poverty are less likely to have a good job, more likely to be neat at the age of 18. All of this is well understood. So we pay the price of failure for the very, very big numbers of children we see growing up in poverty. I mean, we hadn't waited around for the child poverty strategy to take action. We've talked about free school meals. That's a huge intervention. New free breakfast clubs, and of course the childcare expansion too, because through the development of the strategy and through the work of the task force, we've heard directly from parents about what matters to them, and barriers to work and access to childcare has been a key feature of that. Alongside the 2-child limit, the other area where if we could make more progress, we'd lift more children out of poverty is in two-parent families, where if the second parent in the family were able to work or to work a bit more, that would also have that would also lead to a marked improvement in terms of the child poverty numbers. And this aligns with our wider childcare and early years expansion, especially in putting in place, making sure we've got the childcare places in areas of disadvantage where parents have been least able to access them. That's the school-based nurseries programme in particular. So it's not really a question of whether other actions that we would have taken. I think the big outstanding question that people had where it came to the strategy was around the 2-child limit. That's why we've taken action. But there remains more to do. We cannot think that this is job done, because the barriers that many parents will face are also about skills, access to transport, ability to work the hours, flexibility, much more besides. And that's where the child poverty strategy will set the longer term direction for all government departments in tracking that over the course of the Parliament.
I mean, you're right, it is a big step, but it will not eradicate child poverty, obviously. What's the next, second biggest, most effective step that can be taken? What further measures are high up on your priority list in order to really shift the dial on child poverty now?
From the evidence that we've seen in the task force, it was that question of the second person in the household being able to work or to work more. That would make a big difference in terms of the numbers if we were able to support that second potential earner to be in work or to work more. The other big difference that I think that we've seen over time is the proportion of housing costs that families are experiencing. More families in private rented accommodation compared to social housing. When we've looked at the situation in 1997 to now, one of the big shifts that we've seen over time is that we've got more families in the private rented sector where they have been subject to fluctuations in rent, fewer rights. We're obviously seeking to address that through the renters reform legislation, but also the investment in social housing and dealing with temporary accommodation. One of the biggest issues that has come up time and time again, and this goes back to our discussions about local authorities and their finances, is the sheer numbers of children who are living in temporary accommodation. I mean, it's completely unacceptable, but also has a big impact on their learning, big impact on attendance at school. So I'd say those areas of housing, ability, access to the labour market and childcare are some of the key issues that, not just that we've looked at from the evidence, but we've heard directly from parents and those living in poverty, those with lived experience of this, what it means to them.
Thank you. Serena.
Thank you. Leading on nicely from that question, so to delve deeper into early years, yes, it's welcome that this year 1.7 million children were registered for government-funded entitlements, over 400,000 children from a year earlier, and it's largely been driven by children aged 9 months to 2 years registered for the expanded working parent entitlement. But concerns still exist on children who come from workless households on their access to early years education. So what strategies are in place for those?
Yeah, so making sure that families can access high quality, affordable and flexible early education and childcare is critical to the work that we're doing across the Department for Education. That means we provided over £8 billion in 25-26 for early years entitlements, expected to increase to over £9 billion in 26-27. We we do recognise that some parents will be eligible for the some of the universal offers that are there, but the offer is focused in supporting parents into work. I think it's the rollout that we delivered in September was a big job of work at the department led. It was far from guaranteed that it would be a success. I inherited a commitment that had been made to parents with no plan to deliver that and no funding set aside for it. And in addition, we've worked really closely with local authorities and providers to make sure that the places are there, particularly in areas where we know that there have been bigger shortages over the years, and our school-based nurseries programme is partly about responding to that and to shaping the market and creating the places where they don't currently exist. But I do recognise that we have a system that has evolved over time with extra entitlements and eligibility kind of bolted on rather than it being done in a coherent way. And that's why, as we set out at the budget, we'll be leading a review of childcare provision. And the purpose of that review is to simplify the system for families, making it easier to access childcare and to increase the overall impact of the government's offer. And that will involve looking at what we spend, how we spend it. I would just say that where it comes to support for disadvantaged children and families in particular, we did almost double the early years pupil premium in order to provide that kind of support, in order to make it easier for parents and families to access what they need. And to the point earlier about looking at the evidence around this, we're working with the Education Endowment Foundation to understand what impact that funding in that targeted way has delivered. But I appreciate that there remain other areas for consideration, and through the review we'll look closely at them.
Yes, on the 11th of November we also heard from witnesses from the private, voluntary and independent sector who face real pressures due to the national funding rates that haven't caught up after more than a decade of underfunding. Is there some light at the end of the tunnel?
So, as I say, we are investing more through the early years pupil premium, and we have also worked to provide a £75 million grant in 25-26 to support the sector in this really pivotal year as we secure the successful rollout of the expansion. We will be able to say more about rates before long, but over £9 billion. With the amount we're spending expected to increase to over £9 billion in 26-27, I think in what is a very challenging fiscal context, I think demonstrates this government's commitment to early years education and making sure that our children get the best start in life.
Darren.
Sorry. Turning to the curriculum and assessment review, obviously there were a number of recommendations made by Professor Francis. Some of those have been taken, some of those haven't. One of them being the recommendation that both English and maths are assessed in Year 8, and you have decided to assess English but not maths. Can you explain your thinking behind that, please?
Yeah, and I just want to emphasise our thanks to Professor Becky Francis and to the panel for their excellent work and for the review and what they've brought forward. It does give us a really clear direction around making sure that children get a strong academic core running alongside a broad curriculum to make sure that all of our children are really well prepared for the next steps in their journey. We did consider obviously all of the review's recommendations carefully, and where it comes to English and maths in particular, we decided instead to ask schools to carry out their own assessments in maths and writing during Key Stage 3, as many of them already do so. And we chose to focus our efforts around the Year 8 reading test because reading unlocks the rest of the curriculum. And we know that you can't enjoy or study maths or geography or any other subject if you're not able to read fluently and confidently. So we took a decision to prioritise. Sometimes you can't do everything, but we will be working with schools to ask them to carry out their own assessments in maths or writing. But I do believe that reading is the way in which we unlock the school curriculum for many young people, not least given the big challenges that we see from the transition to from primary to secondary, and I believe that a Year 8 reading test will really focus efforts on improving standards around reading. But alongside that, of course, next year is going to be a National Year of Reading, and that's how, and I know the committee's just launched an inquiry into understanding some of the changes that we've seen over time in children's reading patterns and whether they still enjoy reading, and look forward to working with the committee on that. And I think it will be an exciting year as we launch that National Year of Reading, so we support our young people to really love it and enjoy it, as well as having the foundations that they need.
So is that prioritisation that you've just spoken about the reason why, for example, you've decided to test reading fluency and comprehension rather than writing in Year 8? You're expecting writing to be tested, but you are asking schools to do that?
Yes, through formative assessment rather than through a statutory national test.
And once they've done that, how are you as a department going to be monitoring that to see if there is the progress that needs to be made and they're expecting to be made?
So they won't be published at a national level. So this isn't about having a list and a ranking of schools. It's about schools being able to better track and assess progress of their students in this critical area. And we have heard evidence from many experts about the importance of reading and the importance of Key Stage 3 overall. I think an area of school life that hasn't had the attention and focus that it deserves.
And I have to declare an interest for this question. I'm the chair of the APPG on modern languages. Obviously, the idea that the EBAC kind of saved modern languages, it went down during the period. So, but do you share my concern that we still need an incentive of some sort that recognises that with the current global challenges we face, with the trade deals that we're needing to do, with our need for soft power, we need more linguists, not fewer. So how are we going to incentivise and how are we going to stop there being a kind of cliff edge now of fewer schools promoting modern languages to their students?
Yeah, and as you say, the review found that the EBAC didn't translate into students studying subjects such as history and languages at 16 to 19, and it didn't shift modern languages take up at GCSE either. So that's why we are bringing in this change, because we felt it unnecessarily constrained student choice, and we'll deliver an improved version of Progress 8 that we'll also consult upon alongside that. I do completely agree about the importance of modern languages. A keen student of modern languages, probably not to quite your level, but it is important that young people have these opportunities. And one of the key areas that the review looked at is again the transition from primary to secondary, and the variability between what students will study at primary and whether that sets them up for continued language study at secondary. So, for example, it's not unusual for a child, for example, to study, say, Spanish at primary school only to arrive at secondary school, and that's not available as an option, so we lack the continuity. They also identified a number of geographic areas where a language take-up had been increased through better collaboration across a local area on some of those key areas, but keen to seek to do more around languages take-up, which, as you say, not only equips young people with some important skills and opportunities and the ability, as you say, to work and to travel.
Would you consider looking at the evidence from around the world that in places where they have enviable language skills among their students, they don't start at Key Stage 2, they start right at Key Stage 1? Is that something you'll look at?
It's an area that we'd always keep under review, but we've obviously just had a big curriculum and assessment review that set out rather a lot that we need to be getting on and doing. I mean, I think, if we're honest, there is also a challenge, given that English is such a well-spoken language across the world. That's not to say I don't want our young people to study modern foreign languages, but given the ease with which we can all travel around the world and speak English, that does sometimes make it a bit trickier to persuade students that it might be for them. But I don't take much persuading of this personally, but I think some young people might still.
Now, just one thing, Chair.
Briefly, if that's okay.
The other thing the review response said was that we were going to look at the possibility of flexible and stepped qualifications in languages.
Yeah.
And that's both because it will help with the issue the Secretary of State's identified around primary to secondary. So, for example, if you imagine it a bit like a set of music exams, If you imagine arriving in secondary school and being able to say, I've got my grade 2 in French, it makes it much easier for the secondary school to plan provision in a way that manages people who are starting at different levels. It also would make it easier for schools that wish to. So again, you have to remember that the national curriculum is a minimum requirement. It doesn't stop schools going beyond it, and many schools do. But again, they tend to be cautious about things that would leave children in a strange place when they come into secondary and meet other schools. It would also make it easier for schools that want to teach languages from earlier, if they wish to, because the child will have achievement they can bank through that set of STEP qualifications.
Serena.
Thank you. What impact do you expect the changes to Progress 8 and Attainment 8 to have on students' subject choices at GCSE?
Yes, so I believe that the current Progress 8 structure has hampered progress in subjects that strengthen our economy and our society, including the arts. That's why we'll be consulting on an improved Progress 8 measure which recognises the value of these subjects and balances that strong academic core with breadth and student choice. I do believe that access to a broad enriched curriculum should be the right of every child, and in recent years that has been too constrained. I don't see this as being a question of academic standards in opposition to breadth. I think the two are complementary, and I believe we can deliver strong academic standards alongside a breadth and a richness that engages students, that also allows them to study subjects that will connect to the world of work and future careers, but also are big areas for our economy. We all recognise the enormous contribution of the creative arts sector, for example, that the fact that there are many fantastic jobs that are there, and that's why I think we've struck the right balance with the changes that we are going to consult on around Progress 8.
Chris.
Thank you, and thank you, Secretary. And I find your comments, particularly with regards to the broad curriculum, really reassuring. Just with regards, obviously, the commitment about triple science and every student who wishes to study triple science having the opportunity to study. I mean, certainly I'd say from my experience of teaching, there was a lack of qualified physics teachers. I think there's a statistic here that only 56% of physics lessons that are currently being taught are being taught by qualified physics teachers. So what is the timeline of offering triple science, and how are you going to address that issue of subject specialism?
We haven't set a timeline on it, but we have set the ambition, and I do think it is important to set the ambition. If you weren't ambitious, you wouldn't ever achieve anything. But we do think that it is important that triple science is available to all students who wish to study it. Currently, access is uneven. Disadvantaged pupils are less likely to enter triple science. In 24-25, it was 12.5% versus 27.5% for non-disadvantaged students. I do recognise that delivering this does present challenges. It means we do need more subject specialists. It means we'll have to work in parts of the country where there is more of a challenge already. But it is encouraging that one of the biggest increases that we've seen in initial teacher training has been, for example, this year in physics. So we are making progress and moving in the right direction. The reason for this is, I want young people to have that opportunity, because it's a key lever for progression. Pupils who study separate sciences are more likely to go on to study science at A level and more likely to study it at degree level. It's not for every young person. Not every young person will want this, but I don't think young people should be denied the opportunity by virtue of where they are. And we are going to work with the sector on some of the barriers and the challenges that we face, particularly around staffing and timetabling. But I do believe it is the right level of ambition to set.
Could I just make one remark about the figures? So quite often the figures that are quoted are the percentage of teachers with a relevant post-A-level qualification in the subject they teach. So for physics in 24-25, that was 58%. However, if you look at the percentage of hours taught in the subject, it often looks very different. So for physics in 24-25, the percentage of hours of physics that were taught by a qualified physics teacher, so qualified in physics, is 72%.
Oh, no, yeah.
So I just think we have to be slightly careful that I think you said lessons, I said hours, but it's the proportion of lessons taught is much higher than the proportion of teachers, because teachers will typically not use their non-specialists for very many hours.
Yeah, you know, as I haven't worked in the school, as you were
Sorry,
saying,
I know you know it.
As you were saying that, I was exactly thinking that. Yeah, no. So just on the physics, that's really exciting. Is there any reason you think that physics is quite popular in terms of initial teacher training at the moment? Have we done anything to sort of do that, or is it just? Do you want me to?
I mean, yes, go on, and then I'll answer. Yeah, no, go ahead, and then I'll add some political points on this.
I think I won't do any political points. I think there are three things. I think there are some general labour market impacts. So again, we're actually seeing really good recruitment across the piece at the moment. Yeah. Second, we did increase the generosity of our support for some of those subjects that are in shortage. So you can get a £29,000 bursary or a £31,000 scholarship for studying physics, and that actually applies across other science subjects. I advertise this to those who are watching because it's a really good offer. And we also put in place top-ups to salary for those who are teaching those subjects in particularly in more disadvantaged areas, because we also see that you're less likely to get a qualified teacher in a school with a very high proportion of disadvantaged pupils, so we're trying to correct for that. And then I think the third factor is actually about us improving the work that we've done, making sure we can do high quality, and I just very carefully emphasise high quality overseas recruitment. So we've actually seen the proportion of domestic applicants for physics go up very sharply as well, but we're also supporting schools to recruit physics teachers from overseas, and that's part of the increase we've seen too.
Thank you.
And all I'd add is that we are taking action in the key areas where we know we need to recruit and retain more teachers. But I do think the emphasis that we have also put on education as being a central driver of and making teaching an attractive place to be, both in terms of pay and the wider changes around workload and well-being, are important in that context too. There are, of course, wider changes that we're seeing across the labour market, but it is encouraging that, you know, through some of the targeted work that we've been doing, including with the sector and some of the campaigns that we've been running around teaching, I think that is bearing fruit, including in FE. There is more to do. There's more to do right across the board. I'd be the first to admit that, but I think it is welcome and sets us on the right path to delivering that triple science entitlement.
Yeah, not a political point, but if you look at the working lives of teachers and leaders study that we published at the end of November, you can see improvements on all of those measures. Working hours coming down, satisfaction going up, actually sense of recognition going up as well. So there's data to support that as well as.
Thank you.
I start by declaring an interest. I'm the chair of the school's APPG, which is the secretariat for which is the NEU, and the reason why this is relevant is because we've launched an inquiry into votes at 16, which is what I want to ask you about, Secretary of State. It's the government's commitment to introduce votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, a manifesto commitment, and this provides a real opportunity to address the lack of political literacy in schools and support young people to take up that democratic right. And we know that if a young person, whether they're 18 or younger or older, votes for the first time, they are likely to continue to vote for the rest of their lives. So a real opportunity to make a lasting impact through this change. But what specific changes are you hoping to see to make sure that impartial political literacy is reinforced in schools? And what support are you providing to teachers so they're able to deliver that political literacy fairly and confidently?
Yeah, so teaching about democracy and elections goes hand in hand with extending votes to 16, and to make sure that young people are engaged positively around this. I mean, you mentioned, and I do just want to stress, of course, that schools have to maintain their duties around political impartiality.
Really?
But of course, schools are an important way where people, through education, can challenge and question and debate issues that matter to them. Through the curriculum and assessment review, we've set out that we'll publish new programmes of study for Key Stage 1 and 2. So for the first time, that improved study around citizenship at primary, with revised programmes for secondary school citizenship, to make sure that all young people receive that strong grounding in a range of topics, including understanding democracy, government and the law, as well as areas of media literacy and being able to consider what's in front of them, particularly important in a world where so much misinformation and disinformation is pushed towards our young people, including from those who would wish our country harm. So we'll consult on programmes of study next year. The new national curriculum will be published in 2027 for first teaching in 2028. Of course, there's nothing to stop schools making progress on this already. Many schools teach this incredibly well and seek to engage young people in understanding our society, understanding the rule of law, understanding democracy, of course, all within the confines of their important duties around political impartiality.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Rebecca, but I would just urge both committee members and Secretary of State and Permanent Secretary to be a little tighter in your answers so that we can get through all the topics that we want to cover off this afternoon. We are at risk of not being able to get to some topics, so thank you very much for your cooperation and help with that. I'm going to go to Rebecca. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. When will the gender questioning guidance for schools be published?
As you know, we inherited draft guidance that applied to children and young people in schools. We've been looking very carefully at this, working with stakeholders, and we do intend to publish this guidance. I do think it was right that we made sure that the guidance aligned with the final recommendations from Dr. Hilary Cass. The previous draft was published ahead of her full and final review. This is an important and obviously delicate area, given that we're talking about children and young people and their well-being. I do recognise that schools have sought guidance in key areas, and we want to provide that. I would also say that running alongside the need for the guidance around gender questioning children, we have also published in July revised RSHE guidance that gives schools the ability to explore some of these areas sensitively and delicately. And I think what we all would want to see is children who need support getting the support that's required. And often, schools, there are important practical considerations I appreciate that apply here. But where we're talking about children's well-being, it's right that we tread with care in this area.
So when will we see the guidance? When will it be released?
We're still currently reviewing the draft non-statutory guidance. We have been looking through the consultation responses, discussing it with stakeholders, considering the evidence, including the final report of Dr. Hilary Cass. I do want to get this right. I want to make sure that schools have the guidance that they need. Of course, there is a separate discussion that's taking place around where some of these questions apply to adults around sex and gender. Of course, there are differences here where it applies to children, including where schools are already required to provide separate facilities for children depending on age around toilets and changing facilities.
Can you give me a ballpark, or do you not know?
I'm afraid I'm not able to give you a date for it. I do recognise its importance, but I also believe it's important that we get this right for young people, for their well-being, but also for schools so that they're confident and clear about the guidance that's set out.
And lastly, once it is published and we know what that guidance is, would you have you given any thought to how you'll make sure that schools comply with it? Have you considered whether Ofsted would look at how schools are approaching this in light of the guidance?
So it will be non-statutory guidance, but of course we do expect schools to follow and implement guidance that is set out for them. I believe that in this area, schools are seeking to do the right thing. These are questions of young people, their well-being. We can sometimes be talking about young people experiencing distress or serious challenges in their life. School leaders seek to do that sensitively, and we would expect them to do so in this area. I'm sorry I can't put a date on it for you, but I do recognise the importance of clarity.
Thank you.
Darren.
Thank you. Secretary of State, there's a disparity, isn't there, in FE colleges branded differently, categorised differently, and their VA, whether they're able to claim VAT or not. In the west of my city, I've got a sixth form academy. They're an academy, they can reclaim VAT costs. Sixth formers that are parts of schools can reclaim their VAT costs. But I've got an FE college and a standalone sixth form in the east of the city where they cannot reclaim their VAT costs. Is that situation justifiable?
Yes, so FE colleges, like many public bodies, can't recover the VAT they incur when some educational institutions can. We keep all taxes under review. Any changes would need to be considered in the wider, broader public finances and the context. And matters around taxation are ultimately above my pay grade, I'm sorry to say.
The committee recommended that that disparity be addressed, and the department has chosen not to accept that recommendation. Can you explain why?
We can't accept the recommendation because we're not in a position to make any changes in this area in the wider context of the public finances. But of course, we continue to discuss with Treasury all questions that relate to funding for education settings. And this is an area that is frequently raised with me, not just here, but across in settings across the country, as I'm sure you'll appreciate.
Yeah, we appreciate that you're keeping it under review. We'll probably keep on nagging you about it.
Did you make recommendations in the budget process on this issue?
I'm afraid I can't talk about discussions that took place during that and what might or might not have been considered, but I do recognise that this is an issue that comes up time and again.
I mean, just to give you an indication of the scale of it, and the government is ambitious for skills and is bringing forward some important reforms in the area of skills. On our visit to City College Norwich, they told us that they showed us around their fantastic new building that they've just delivered, bringing forward a kind of real step change in what they're able to deliver. Their VAT costs were the equivalent of a new additional floor on top of that building that they were not able to build because of a tax situation that is frankly unjustifiable and entirely unfair. So it is not only something that gets raised, it's something that has real material consequences for a sector that's been underfunded, that is central to the delivery of the government's core missions. So we would just keep pushing you on it. If,
Understood.
Yeah. Thank you. So we'll go to Chris again.
Thank you. I declare an interest. I've got a brilliant FE college in Harlow, which is a magically named Harlow College. Kind of carrying on from the point about sort of that inequality there, really. I mean, so college teachers earn, I think it's an average of 15% less than school teachers. And obviously this committee has previously recommended establishment a statutory pay review body for college staff, similar to the school teachers review body. This was something that has been rejected. Perhaps you go into why, but also, would you recognise that there is potentially going to be a widening of that pay gap? And have you got any plans to address this and obviously reduce that pay gap?
Yeah, I do recognise the long-standing challenge in this area. I mean, as you'll know, FE colleges, rather than government, are responsible for setting and negotiating pay within colleges. And where it comes to the recommendation around a statutory pay review body, I do appreciate the committee's interest in this area. All statutory FE providers were incorporated under the terms of the 92 Act, which gave them autonomy over paying contractual terms, and therefore we don't set that. But what we have seen and what we are seeking to do through maximising funding into FE and into 16 to 19 is seeking to make progress on this. It is long-standing, it is a big challenge, but according to the last statistics, the average salary for teachers in FE colleges did increase by 6% in the last year, for which the figures are available. We are investing more into FE, and at the SR, from the SR we'll invest nearly 800 million extra on top of the original 400 million announced in 25-26. So we are serious about prioritising investment in FE. In specific areas, for example, around construction, we've been working very closely with the sector around routes into teaching for those with experience, alongside industry placements, and making sure that we are recruiting more people. And obviously some of what we were talking about earlier around incentive payments will also apply in FE as well, and we're seeing some positive progress in that area. But as I've said, this is a very long-standing gap that's opened up over an extended period of time.
Thank you.
Rena.
Okay, now on to Ofsted. So the Ofsted's commissioned wellbeing impact assessment of the new inspection framework has found that it's likely to increase staff workload, heighten anxiety and maintain the existing high-stakes nature of inspections, What assurances can you give to teachers and school leaders who believe that the new inspection framework fails to address their concerns?
So we do want to deliver a fantastic education for every child, and inspection has to be a part of that. But through the new framework, this is about recognising where schools are doing things really well and celebrating that success, as well as providing more granular insight into areas where there's scope to work with schools to do more. And it's probably just worth saying that the rollout of the first inspections under new arrangements began on the 10th of November. That's on the basis of volunteers who've come forward to be a part of that, and the routine programme is now underway from December. Early feedback to Ofsted has been positive in many areas to make it a more collaborative process, with leaders saying that they really value the fact that HMIs are leading those inspections. But in our accountability statement that we've set out, alongside the work that Ofsted have done, we've been clear that, of course, staff well-being ought to be a key consideration in this. Of course, we want to make sure that staff feel that this is being done with them rather than being done to them. But, of course, we do need to make sure that we are identifying where challenges exist, because children only get one opportunity at school, and it's right, therefore, that we expect the very best for our children, but making sure that's done in a way that is proportionate, celebrates what schools are doing well as identifying further areas for improvement within schools. I think it is my view that the system that came before, and when I would read an Ofsted report, it would capture very, very little about what a school was doing, including the things that I think parents would want to see and value, as well as the areas where parents might want to see further challenge. So this is, I think, a better system that will have a stronger focus on key areas like achievement, attendance, and crucially inclusion. And we talked a lot about SEND earlier. For the first time, inclusion is a really central part of this new framework, and that is important in driving the change across the system that we need to see around all schools being a part of that shift, particularly on mainstream inclusion.
Okay, so what work is being done to reassure teaching unions that are now considering industrial action against Ofsted reforms that the new framework will not have a negative impact on their workload and well-being?
One of the key areas that teaching unions, particularly head teachers unions, raise is around not just the nature of inspection, but the quality and the consistency of inspection and the judgments that arise from that. That's why Ofsted are doing further work around how to ensure greater consistency in terms of validating their judgments and the outcomes. I also believe that Dame Christine Gilbert, as the new chair of Ofsted, will bring welcome expertise and insight into the work that Ofsted are leading. I've spoken with her about much of this as well, about making sure that parents have confidence in the system, as well as making sure that staff feel that their voices are heard. I mean, there is, of course, a balance in all of this. It is important that we hear what school leaders through their trade unions have to say, but we also have to balance our responsibilities as a government to making sure that there is high quality education and standards for all children. And I'm acutely aware that it is often children from less well-off backgrounds and working class children who have the most to lose when standards and expectations are not as high as they should be. So there is a balance in all of this. And I know that Ofsted are keen to make sure that as this new framework rolls out, that it's done in a way that takes the sector with them.
I think we're all keeping a very close eye on the rollout.
Absolutely.
Peter.
Secretary of State, you touched on inclusion there, an important new part of the framework. Obviously, the Ofsted reforms have come in before the government set out its proposed changes to the wider SEND system. So just wanted to ask how these two things are aligned and how you see the new work being done by Ofsted on inclusion fitting into the wider SEND reform agenda.
Yeah, I think this is one example of a number of areas where it's important that we start to make change happen ahead of the white paper. So the fact that inclusion is for the first time a central part of the new Ofsted framework is a critical way that we will make change happen right across the system. It also is why, taken together with the capital we're investing in creating more places, the wider work that we have underway around investment, training for staff, and much more besides, that we start that process of change that's already underway well ahead of any longer term reforms that we set out through the white paper. And you know, I have heard from many parents, but also I've heard from people across the system that they want to ensure that all schools are doing what they can around inclusion. This is a chance for schools to really shine and to demonstrate what they're doing well. And whilst I recognise that inspection carries with it, in some senses quite big challenges for staff and for schools, it also carries with it the chance to really demonstrate what is working well, what they can be proud of and what parents can see. And I think through the new approach, through the way that it will identify areas for improvement as well as areas of real strengths, I think parents will get a much clearer sense of a school's performance.
I can certainly think of schools in my constituency who do fantastic work on inclusion, and I'm very excited that that will be recognised.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Caroline. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So the government has said that all schools should take steps to prohibit the use of smartphones during the school day, but that it doesn't support an outright ban on smartphones in schools. So, as I told the Prime Minister, I recently hosted a roundtable with head teachers of secondary schools who spoke about the transformational effect that a complete ban had had on their schools and how much more effective it was than the turn it off and put it in your bag policy. But the issue for them is a vocal pushback from a minority of parents, and one said that he'd been spat and sworn at by parents for his choice, his decision to do this. Now, research from UE shows that 65% of teachers want more restrictions than the switch it off and put it in your bag policy. This is the biggest single change you could make to the quality of children's education with absolutely no cost. So why does the government continually refuse to introduce legislation which will cost nothing, massively reduce safeguarding harms in schools and improve children's educational outcomes and emotional well-being?
So mobile phones have no place in our schools, and school leaders already have the powers to ban them. I think, if I may, through what you've just said, you've identified that school leaders already have the power to take action in that way.
If I may, it's really difficult for a head teacher to do this, and one of my head teachers has just done it. The pushback, not from the kids, but the pushback from the parents is really hard because it becomes a personal decision by that head teacher, and they want to be able to say, I have to do it because that's what the law says, because that takes all the heat off them, and we shouldn't be putting head teachers in that position.
So no school leader, no teacher, no one in education should face what you've just described. It's completely unacceptable. But school leaders do have the powers to ban phones in schools. Your example demonstrates that they have the powers in order to do that. Now, what we've also seen sometimes this has been done on a local authority-wide basis. That can be an effective way of schools managing that. Of course, schools will sometimes wish to make small exemptions, for example, for reasons connected to disability, and I think it is right that schools are able to do that. But the evidence that we have is that phones are already prohibited. Schools should enforce that. I think there is a question. I think where there is a genuine question is connected to wider behaviour and enforcement, and we want to work with schools to make that happen. But I would just slightly caution against sometimes some of the challenges that can also be presented in different contexts and wanting school leaders to implement the approach that's right for them. So, for example, some school leaders have taken the decision to use pouches. That is a route that's available to them, and I would support schools in taking the choice that's right for them in their context. Equally, some will have introduced an outright ban. There are different ways of doing this, but I can be absolutely clear that phones should not be disrupting lessons. They have no place in our schools. But I do think that what you've just set out about the approach that your school leaders are taking demonstrates they do have the powers to act. And sadly, the abuse that they're facing or have faced from a small minority of parents is completely unacceptable. They have my full backing in doing what they believe to be the right thing for their school and for their community.
They don't have your backing in saying this is what you have to do, so therefore you're taking the responsibility off them and putting it on the DfE.
The guidance is already clear that schools should prohibit the use of phones throughout the school day, including break times and lunch times, and we expect schools to take steps in line with that guidance, but there are different ways of schools implementing that.
Okay, thank you. Do you want me to 24 as well? Okay. Sorry. So the government's rollout of mental health support teams in schools and colleges has been described as glacial. What steps is the government taking to accelerate the delivery of mental health support teams?
So we're expanding NHS mental health support teams to provide access to specialist mental health professionals in every school by 2930, and by April next year we estimate an additional 900,000 pupils in schools and learners in FE will be covered by a mental health support team, around 6 million in total, or 60% of all pupils and learners, up from around 5 million in 2025. So we are investing more into that, but alongside expanding mental health support teams, we're also recruiting more mental health staff to support both children and adults and making sure that they've got easy and early access to mental health support.
Okay, so how will you ensure that children in schools who have to wait until 2030 for this provision, how are you going to make sure that they're not left without vital mental health support in these intervening years?
So by next year we will have covered 60% of pupils. We want to move rapidly to get to every school by 2930, but we have made significant progress. Almost an extra 1 million pupils and learners will by next April be benefiting from a mental health support team. And you know, I've visited one school that's already taking part, and I think what was especially powerful is the join up between what happens in school and access to ongoing treatment and support, especially for children where needs are most acute. So this is again part of the way in which we can stop problems escalating, because this is connected to NHS treatment and services, it can then lead to onward progression where needs are more serious.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go to Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the attainment gap, we know that the attainment gap has grown significantly since the pandemic between disadvantaged students and those who are not disadvantaged. Now, the Education Policy Institute has said that this is entirely explained by higher levels of absence for disadvantaged students. I'd be interested to know if you agree with that. And also, can you tell us what it is you're doing to address this gap and also address the absence rate?
And I welcome the evidence and research put forward by the Education Policy Institute. It seems self-evident really that if children aren't in school, that they're less likely to succeed in school, and some of the challenges that we've seen around attendance have particularly affected certain groups. We are moving in the right direction around persistent absenteeism. There's more to do, but we are seeing progress. There still remains a challenge around severe absence, where some of that is connected to, we're talking about mental health, their access to CAMS, and some of the long-standing challenges that we're seeing. But I believe there has been too casual an attitude for far too long about tackling underperformance, especially where it comes to our more disadvantaged young people. It's why we're strengthening school improvement and rolling out RISE teams in order to target those schools that have been struggling for the longest period of time, more likely to be covering communities of greater challenge with disadvantaged students as a part of that. But there is a deep and genuine issue around the attainment gap that is there, that affects disadvantaged students. It's a key area that we're considering ahead of the school's white paper, but also does go to those questions around teaching and making sure that we've got high quality specialist teachers, where we know that disadvantaged young people often face challenges around access to specialist provision.
No, I take your point. And earlier today you mentioned that you doubled the early years pupil premium in an attempt to address this gap. If you accept that attendance is the biggest driver, though, are these efforts fruitless? Is it pointless to do these additional things if you can't even get them into school?
I think it has to be a combination. I mean, attendance is clearly a critical factor and has been a real focus of effort from this government. What we have seen is real progress around persistent absenteeism in particular, around young people who are regularly missing more than 10% of their time in school. But also from January, our new attendance and behaviour hubs will be providing intensive support to 5,000 schools. So to make sure that they're working together, learning from other similar schools. We've done quite a lot around data sharing between schools to understand patterns, to understand how they can learn from one another, including where they have a similar cohort of young people. So what is it that that School A could do in learning from School B. But you know, we have seen a reduction around persistent absence, down significantly to 18.7%, down from 20.7% last year. That equates to 140,000 fewer persistently absent pupils. This is promising, it's good, but it's not enough, and we have to push further, because every day a child misses in school is a day that they lose from their learning. And what I also hear from teachers is that it can obviously cause disruption to the wider class environment, having to cover work, challenges that it presents for everyone as a part of that.
No, absolutely. And I wish you the best of luck in ensuring that that trend continues. Conscious of time, so I only have one more question around this. So why did the department have to withdraw the recent AI-generated attendance target reports for individual schools, and what lessons have been learned from this?
Susan, could you speak to that?
Thank you. Yes, so we identified, having issued the first version of the reports, that there were some errors in them that were pointed out to us by some of the earliest schools to receive them. We withdrew them immediately, and within, I think, 4 days had reissued the corrected reports. We have looked at what caused those errors and are learning the lessons for the future. It was, I think there's a bit of kind of, when you try and do something new, you run a little bit more of a risk of making those difficulties. We should have spotted it before they went out. We really tried to correct it very quickly after it was spotted.
Now, as somebody who turned himself into the first AI MP, there are always pitfalls in this area, so I can appreciate that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. RISE teams have started to engage with schools that have concerning levels of attainment, yet some respondents to the government's own school accountability consultation raised concerns that schools may off-roll or exclude pupils in order to improve attainment outcomes. What safeguards will the department put in place to ensure that schools supported by RISE teams do not resort to these practices?
So work is ongoing with Ofsted in particular around tackling the practice of off-rolling, where children are removed from school rolls without formal permanent exclusion. We're clear that is completely unacceptable. The schools should not be seeking to game the system, and we continue to work with Ofsted to tackle that. But it is worth just saying, where it comes to the work that we're delivering through RISE, this is about working with the schools that have faced some of the greatest challenges over an extended period of time, some what people often refer to as stuck schools, where progress hasn't been satisfactory. This can include schools where structural change has already taken place. You know, I do continue to believe that structural change is often the right and necessary step when standards are not improving. But sadly, for many of the stuck schools, there are already schools that have been through intervention and structural change, and progress has been too slow. So, you know, we are working with schools, with a significant number of schools through the programme. As of September 25, we'd identified a significant number eligible for support, and the number of schools implementing targeted RISE as of September is 197. So this is a new programme, one that we are keen to get right and learn as we go, but represents the single biggest shift in addressing some of the long-standing challenges that some schools will face. And in some cases, we are talking about schools that in their entire history have never reached even a level of good in old money in an Ofsted inspection over, you know, you can be talking a decade. So some of these challenges are deep-rooted. We want to learn about how this works as we go. Many of our best trusts are involved in supporting this work, and I think there are particular challenges where it comes to certain parts of the country and certain communities, for example, coastal communities being one example, where we're keen to see what lessons in certain areas might be applicable elsewhere.
Thank you. And what evidence have you seen that RISE teams will be more effective than academy orders?
This is not a replacement for structural intervention where that is the right and necessary thing to do. But in many cases, RISE schools are schools that have already been through that structural intervention, and yet we're still seeing progress that is too slow. So it does have to be a question of both. And, you know, if I will not hesitate if the school is not currently an academy, if RISE doesn't deliver the progress that we need, then we retain the ability to take action around structural intervention if that's what's needed. That remains important, but clearly for some schools this just hasn't worked over a period of time, and you know, the focus that we're bringing around brilliant school leaders with the track record in turning around schools that have faced these challenges is a critical part of the programme.
Okay, I'm aware of time, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. So turning now to higher education, at the autumn budget the government announced that the international student levy will go ahead, but the department's updated analysis has increased the number of international students you expect to be deterred by the levy in the longer term. It's gone up from 7,000 to 17,000 a year. This is despite the levy being lower than originally planned. So could you just explain that change in estimate, please?
Yes, so we committed to introducing an international student levy through the immigration white paper. We looked at the best way of implementing that levy, and I do want to stress that, you know, international students make an important contribution to our country, to our institutions, but and we have you know, engaged with the sector on this and have set out our plans around a flat fee of £925, so broadly equivalent to 4.5%, so a reduction from the 6% level initially proposed in the immigration white paper. But we are going to use this money, as we discussed earlier, to fund skills support and the introduction of new targeted maintenance grants. I do believe that strikes the right balance in recognising the important contribution of international students, but being able to reinvest directly into support for domestic students as well.
Can you explain the change in estimate of how many international students are likely to be deterred by this levy? It's gone up from 7,000.
I'm not sure of the exact figures.
I would need to go back and check this, and I think we should come back to you. But my understanding is that it's a wider estimate about the impact of a collection of policies, including wider migration policies across government, rather than the levy on its own.
Okay.
But we can come back and I can come back and confirm that that is true. But I think that's what drives the difference you described.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned the maintenance grant. The proposed maintenance grant will only be £1,000 a year, restricted to certain subjects, and be introduced in nearly 3 years' time, compared with what used to be £3,000 for all subjects when they were abolished. And the maximum will only be £750 in the third year, when students are likely to be living out possibly in private rented accommodation. It might not even cover a month's rent. Is it really going to shift the dial on widening participation for disadvantaged students? I totally accept that it's better than nothing, and I'm pleased to see maintenance grants back on the table. Yeah. But is the figure we're talking about going to shift the dial?
It's an important step forward, and it reintroduces the principle of maintenance grant support for the first time in many, many years. It of course aligns with the introduction of the international students levy, so the money raised through the levy will be reinvested into support for domestic students. But of course it's not the only way that we can continue to widen participation and access across higher education. Institutions themselves have a role to play in this. We're working with them through the regulator, the Office for Students, around how we do this. But I do believe it is an important step forward and reintroduces the principle of maintenance support through a grant basis for the first time.
It's a start, and it's going to keep getting better.
Well, let's see. But it's an important shift and an important step forward, but is only clearly one part of a wider approach that's needed around access and participation. And you know, there is also more that we will want to see from providers in working together to collaborate to ensure that young people are aware of the benefits and opportunities that come of university education, because whilst you know, we have seen an increase in the number of young people going to university, that has not been felt universally, and that has not been both in terms of geography and background. So there are still wider challenges that, yes, are connected to the funding landscape, but I think go beyond the funding landscape. And there's a role for providers in working together, perhaps on a regional basis, around some of that.
Thank you.
Caroline Johnson, very briefly.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State, everything that your department does, whether that be the education of children or preparing them for careers for the future, is going to require a strong economy to either provide the money for it or to provide the jobs for people to go into for their onward career. Now, part of the OBR target was about productivity, and you were told about that, we understand, as members of the Cabinet. But the rest of the OBR report showing the rising tax receipts were told you were not informed of before the budget. And the media are saying that this has caused a misleading impression to some cabinet ministers who felt there was a black hole requiring tax rises. What did you understand before the budget?
I understood that the public finances were under significant pressure. That had been the case for some time as the Chancellor set out the impact of austerity, the impact of Brexit, and the impact of the decisions taken at Liz Truss's mini-budget have all placed considerable strain on the public finances. That means we've had to take the right but necessary decisions both to stabilise the economy, and that's why it's so encouraging that we're seeing interest rates being cut 5 times under this government. There's more to do, and we hope that the Bank of England will be able to consider this further in the months and years to come. But the budget also delivered big cost of living improvements for working people, whether that's through a reduction, taking £150 off energy bills, and also critically in terms of what we do in the Department for Education, big expansion in free school meals, breakfast clubs, and the 2-child limit will all make a material difference to families across our country. We can't expect to be a productive and vibrant economy if we consign 4.5 million children in our country to poverty.
To be clear, Secretary of State, did you understand that there was a deficit or a black hole, as it was described, or did you understand that there was a surplus in advance of the budget?
I think it is clear that the public finances were under considerable strain. I mean, we talked earlier about the challenges that we're facing around SEND and the deficits that exist and the pressures that will continue to rise without action. Again, emphasising that the starting point is about children and their life chances. But I think your questions around the nature of discussions with the OBR that were conducted by the Treasury would probably be best directed to the Chancellor and to the Treasury.
Thank you. I just have one final question, Secretary of State. So just returning to where we started with SEND, there have been over the last 15 months or so many rumours and false starts about the government's plans for SEND. It was rumoured that there was going to be a white paper in the summer. It's been rumoured that there'll be changes around the threshold for EHCPs. There have been many discussions of that nature. I can tell you every time that happens, my phone lights up with parents and carers and stakeholders who are made more anxious in an already stressful situation as a consequence of speculation about SEND reform. So you have now got a consultation engagement process that is underway, and you've indicated that the white paper will be published early in the new year. Can you give any more certainty to parents and carers who are really anxious about this area of government reform as to the timetable for reform, and can you give reassurance that it isn't going to slip and drift any further than the timescale that you're currently working to?
We do want to publish the Schools White Paper early next year, and I do appreciate how strongly parents feel about this topic. I recognise the need for change, and I've heard that from parents, but I also recognise that change brings with it uncertainty, and that it causes concern for parents even where they recognise the system isn't working as it should. That's why I take my responsibilities incredibly seriously in this area. I do think it was right that we took the time to go through the process that is underway at the moment around engaging with parents, with key stakeholders around this process of co-creation. And I would urge parents, I'd urge anyone right across education or anyone with an interest in this topic to take part in either the face-to-face or the online events so that they can share their views. This is a genuine process that they can be involved in shaping so that we can have a system of support for children with SEND that puts in place the right support, that is less adversarial, that identifies need and puts in place support much earlier than is the case right now. I do think we have a really big and genuine opportunity to deliver a better and improved system. I know the challenges that are there, and I know for many parents it can feel like there isn't light at the end of the tunnel, but this is their chance to shape what we do. And this is a key area that is central to all of the work we'll take forward in the months to come. I do welcome the work that the committee has done that has been important in our work in understanding some of these key areas. But ultimately, I think what matters most is that we get this right, because the pressures are acute for families and for parents. Children are being failed by a system that is not working for them. So I would just I appreciate it can be unsettling, and you know, I can't sadly control some of what gets carried by way of rumour in newspapers, but this is a genuine process. There have been no final decisions taken on any aspect of reform, but we are already driving change across the system ahead of longer term reform through many of the areas we've talked about today, for example, more specialist provision in mainstream.
Is it still going to be early in the new year?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary of State, Permanent Secretary, for your time this afternoon. That brings our session to a close. Order.